At 60, I packed away my heart like an old sweater that no longer fit. This part of life is over, I told myself, as I settled into a routine of quiet dinners alone and weekends with my grandchildren. I was convinced that romance and passion were chapters that had closed for me, until that Tuesday afternoon when he walked into my community art class with paint-splattered shoes and a smile that made me forget my own name. If you've ever felt that time has passed you by, that love has an expiration date stamped somewhere around your 50th birthday, then this video is for you. I'm going to share how finding love in my 60s wasn't just possible. It was more profound, more honest, and more liberating than anything I'd experienced before, and why it's never too late for your heart to surprise you. When I turned 60, I had convinced myself that romance belonged to the young. After a 25-year marriage that ended in divorce at 52, and a few awkward dates that left me feeling more alone than ever, I made peace with solitude. I decorated my home, joined a book club, volunteered at the library, and told myself that fulfillment doesn't require partnership. My children worried, of course. They created dating profiles I never checked and arranged introductions I politely declined. Love at this age feels impossible, I told my daughter one evening. Everyone has too much history, too many habits, too much life behind them. She looked at me with such sadness that I changed the subject, but privately I believed it. Studies show that many people over 55 stop actively seeking romantic relationships, believing the opportunity has passed. According to a survey by Senior Living, 68% of seniors who were single had stopped dating altogether, despite 72% reporting that companionship was still important to them. What I didn't understand then, what I couldn't have known, was that love after 60 isn't a diminished version of young love. It's something entirely different, built on a foundation of self-knowledge that only comes with decades of living. When you no longer need someone to complete you or secure your future, when you've already weathered life's biggest storms alone, love becomes something purer. It becomes a choice rather than a necessity. Throughout this video, I'll share how meeting Richard at 62 changed everything I thought I knew about late-life romance, and why the love that blooms in life's autumn carries a sweetness all its own. Stay with me until the end, because the last point contains the most important lesson I learned, one that completely transformed how I view love at any age. This isn't just my story, it's potentially yours too. Whether you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s or beyond, whether you've given up on love or are still cautiously hoping, what I'm about to share might just give you the courage to leave the door to your heart slightly ajar. By the end of this video, you'll understand why finding love later in life isn't just possible, it's often more rewarding than when we're young. You'll discover how the vulnerability of aging creates the perfect conditions for authentic connection, and how the love that comes when you least expect it can be the love that transforms you most profoundly. The most unexpected gift of finding love at 60 was the complete absence of pretense. When Richard asked about my life during that first coffee after art class, I told him everything. About my divorce, my career failures, my struggles with my oldest son. There was no energy left for crafting an impressive facade. I remember sitting across from him, holding my coffee mug with both hands, and suddenly realizing I hadn't thought about how I looked or sounded for over an hour. I was just there, present, authentic, and he was still listening, still interested. In my 20s and 30s, dates were auditions. I carefully curated what I shared, always conscious of how I was being perceived. Did I seem successful enough? Attractive enough? Interesting enough? Dating was exhausting because it required constant performance, but at 60, those concerns had fallen away like autumn leaves. When you've lived 6 decades, you know yourself, the good, the bad, the complicated. You've made peace with most of your flaws and learned to value your strengths. I no longer needed someone to validate my worth or reflect a flattering image back to me. This created a freedom I'd never experienced in my younger relationships. Richard later told me he felt the same liberation. "It's like we skipped all the nonsense," he said. "We just showed up as ourselves and said, 'This is me. Take it or leave it.' And that honesty created trust from the very beginning." This freedom from pretense doesn't just make dating more enjoyable, it creates the foundation for a more authentic relationship. When you begin with honesty, You build on solid ground. Ask yourself, how much energy have you spent in past relationships trying to seem more perfect than you are? What might be possible if you simply arrived as yourself with nothing to prove? When you fall in love at 20, the future stretches endlessly before you. At 60, you become exquisitely aware that time is finite. This awareness doesn't diminish love. It intensifies it, bringing a presence and appreciation to each moment that younger love often lacks. Our third date was nothing special by conventional standards. We walked through the botanical gardens and had lunch at a small cafe. But I remember the specific quality of the light that day, the pattern of Richard's plaid shirt, the way he gestured with his hands when he talked about architecture. I was absorbing everything, conscious that these moments were precious gifts, not guarantees. This awareness of mortality isn't morbid, it's clarifying. It strips away trivialities and focuses your attention on what matters. Small disagreements. Don't escalate. Because you recognize they're not worth the time, you don't postpone joy or wait for some future date to start really living together. There's research to support this. Psychologist Laura Carstenson's socio-emotional selectivity theory suggests that as people recognize their time is limited, they prioritize emotionally meaningful experiences and relationships. This emotional selectivity makes relationships formed later in life especially rich and satisfying. Richard and I discussed this openly. We acknowledged that even if we had 20 good years together, that would be a blessing. This acknowledgement might sound sad to younger ears, but it created a poignant sweetness to our time together. We never took each other for granted because we never forgot that each day was valuable. This consciousness permeated everything, from how we resolved conflicts to how we planned our time. We didn't waste days on petty grievances or silent treatments. We dealt with issues directly and returned to appreciation quickly. Consider this. How might your approach to love change if you were deeply conscious of its finite nature? Would you waste less time on insecurities or meaningless conflicts? Would you express your affection more freely and frequently? Time's limitation can be love's greatest enhancement. One unexpected joy of later life love is the rich tapestry of shared cultural references and historical experiences. When he mentioned watching the moon landing as a child, Richard knew exactly what I meant. When he referenced a song from 1978, I could hum along. We had lived through the same world events, remembered the same cultural shifts, and understood how society had transformed during our lifetimes. One evening we were making dinner together when an old Beatles song came on the radio. Without a word, Richard took my hand, and we slow danced in the kitchen. There was something profoundly connecting about knowing we had both been teenagers when this song first played, that we had grown up in the same world, even though we hadn't known each other. This shared historical context creates an unspoken understanding that's difficult to achieve in relationships with large age gaps. It's not just about cultural references, it's about having processed similar life stages and challenges, about having your worldview shaped by the same pivotal moments in history. Richard and I both understood the experience of raising children in the 80s and 90s, of navigating career changes in midlife, of watching parents age and pass away. This created a shorthand in our communication and a depth to our connection that felt like coming home. There's comfort in not having to explain yourself constantly, in making references that are immediately understood. Studies on relationship satisfaction consistently show that shared values and experiences contribute significantly to relationship stability and happiness. When you start a relationship later in life with someone of a similar age, you begin with a foundation of common experiences that enriches your connection. This doesn't mean younger couples can't build wonderful relationships. Of course they can. But there's a unique pleasure in connecting with someone who has moved through time alongside you, even from a distance, who understands the cultural forces that shaped you because they shaped them too. Ask yourself, how valuable is it to be with someone who instinctively understands your references, who has weathered the same historical storms, who doesn't need the context of your life constantly explained? Let's talk about what nobody tells you about love after 60. Physical intimacy can be profoundly beautiful, often more satisfying than in youth. Society perpetuates the myth that passion belongs exclusively to the young, but my experience proved otherwise. The first time Richard and I were intimate, I was terrified. My body had changed, gravity and time had done their work. I considered dimming the lights, making excuses, but then I remembered all I had survived: childbirth, cancer, menopause. This body had carried me through life's storms. It deserved respect, not shame. What I discovered was revolutionary to me. Physical love in your 60s isn't about perfect bodies, it's about perfect presence. Without the distractions of career building or child rearing, without the performance anxiety of youth, there's an ability to be fully present in physical connection that creates a depth younger me could never have imagined. Studies from the National Council on Aging found that many adults over 60 report having the most satisfying physical relationships of their lives. Without the pressure of reproduction or societal expectations, intimacy becomes purely about connection and pleasure. Richard and I approached each other with gratitude rather than criticism. We didn't see flaws when we looked at each other. We saw evidence of lives fully lived. His grey hair, the laugh lines around his eyes, the scar on his knee from a sailing accident in his 40s, these weren't imperfections, but chapters in his story. So a story I was privileged to join. This shift in perspective, from seeing the aging body as a decline to recognizing it as a testament to resilience, transformed how I experienced physical intimacy. There was less self-consciousness and more joy, less performance and more authentic connection. Medical professionals acknowledge that while the physical aspects of intimacy may change with age, satisfaction often increases because of improved communication, reduced inhibitions, and a focus on quality over quantity. Consider this. What if the changes in your body aren't obstacles to intimacy, but invitations to a more present, conscious form of connection? What if physical love in later life isn't a diminished version of youthful passion, but something richer, deeper, and more satisfying? Perhaps the most significant difference between finding love at 60 versus 20 is the emotional independence you bring to the relationship. After decades of life, through career challenges, raising children, managing households, weathering losses, you've proven to yourself that you can survive, even thrive, on your own. 6 months into our relationship, Richard went on a 2-week trip to visit his daughter in Australia. In my younger years, such a separation would have triggered insecurity and constant checking in. Instead, I enjoyed the solitude, pursued my own interests, and was genuinely happy when we reunited. The relationship enhanced my life, but didn't define it. This emotional self-sufficiency creates a healthier dynamic. Instead of needing each other, out of insecurity or incompleteness, we chose each other from positions of strength and wholeness. The relationship wasn't burdened with the impossible task of providing all fulfillment and meaning. Psychologists call this differentiation, the ability to maintain your sense of self while being intimately connected to another person. It's widely recognized as a cornerstone of healthy relationships, but it often takes decades of life experience to fully develop this capacity. Richard had his friends and hobbies. I had mine. We came together not to rescue each other from loneliness, but to share our already meaningful lives. This created a relationship with more oxygen, more freedom, and less codependence than anything I'd experienced before. The paradox is beautiful. By needing the relationship less desperately, I was able to enjoy it more fully. Without the anxious attachment of youth, love becomes less about filling a void and more about celebrating a connection. This emotional independence also created resilience. When conflicts arose, they didn't threaten the foundation of their relationship because our well-being wasn't solely dependent on romantic harmony. We could disagree, take space to process, and return to the conversation with clarity rather than desperation. Ask yourself, how has your emotional independence evolved over the decades of your life? How might bringing this self-sufficiency into a new relationship create something more balanced and healthy than what was possible in your youth? The most profound lesson I've learned through finding love at 60 is that life offers second chances in ways we never anticipate. After my divorce, I thought certain doors had closed permanently. I believed some experiences belonged to a chapter of my life that had ended. Finding deep, transformative love again wasn't just surprising, it revolutionized how I understand life itself. Last summer, Richard and I were watching the sunset from our porch swing. I turned to look at him, this man who wasn't part of my life 2 years ago, and I was overcome with a sense of wonder. I never saw you coming. I said. He took my hand and replied, "That's how all the best parts of life arrive." And I realized he was right. Life is not linear. It doesn't progress through neat, predictable stages that close permanently once you pass through them. It circles back, offering new beginnings when you least expect them, proving that growth and transformation remain possible at every age. Research on adult development increasingly shows that significant positive change can occur throughout the lifespan. The concept of emerging adulthood has expanded to recognize that humans continue to evolve and develop new capacities well into their later years. My relationship with Richard taught me to hold my assumptions lightly, to question the stories I tell myself about what's still possible. If love could find me at 60, what else might be waiting around unexpected corners? This openness to surprise has spilled into every area of my life, encouraging me to remain curious rather than resigned. This lesson extends beyond romance. Perhaps you've given up on rekindling a passion for painting, learning a new skill, healing a broken relationship with a sibling, or traveling to places you've always dreamed of visiting. The wisdom of second chances reminds us that closure is often an illusion, that life remains stubbornly open to new possibilities regardless of our age. Consider this final question, which may be the most important. What dreams or possibilities have you prematurely closed the door on? What would change if you allowed yourself to believe that meaningful new beginnings remain possible, regardless of your age or past experiences? Looking back on my journey from resigned solitude to unexpected love, I'm struck by how firmly I believed in limitations that proved to be illusions. I had accepted society's narrative that romance after 60 would be, at best, a practical partnership based more on companionship than passion. I couldn't have been more wrong. The love I found with Richard wasn't a diminished version of young love. It was deeper, richer, and more authentic precisely because of our age and experience. We brought to each other the gifts of self-knowledge, emotional independence, and the precious awareness of time's value. If you take nothing else from my story, remember this. The human heart doesn't acknowledge deadlines or expiration dates. It remains stubbornly capable of surprise, growth, and profound connection at every stage of life. The door to meaningful love never truly closes unless we lock it ourselves. Whether you're 60, 70, or beyond, whether you've experienced great love before or are still waiting for it, I hope my story encourages you to remain open to the unexpected. Life is more circular than linear, more surprising than predictable, and far more generous with second chances than we often give it credit for. Age brings many challenges, yes, but it also brings the wisdom to recognize and appreciate love in its most authentic form, and that perhaps is the greatest gift of all. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with love in later life. Have you found your unexpected connection after 50? Are you still hoping? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This community grows stronger through our shared stories. For more videos about navigating life's later chapters with grace, hope, and authenticity, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. We publish new content every Wednesday, exploring everything from relationships after 50 to reinventing yourself in retirement. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, the most beautiful chapters of your story may still be unwritten, waiting for you to turn the page. Until next week, stay open to life's surprises and keep believing in your heart's capacity for new beginnings, no matter your age.